Ben kendim nasıl çalışabilirim daha sürdürülebilir bir gelecek için?
Paris জলবায়ু চুক্তি কি?
Mikä on pienenevän mehiläispopulaation vaikutus
Waarom
maapallon
zouden we om
ekosysteemiin?
klimaatverandering moeten geven?
循環型社会ってどういう
Quel
仕組み
est pied? Manger du soja non durable ou manger
ප්ලාස්ටික්
du
ස්ට්‍රෝස්
viande
හෝ
locale?
බෑග් භාවිතා නොකිරීමේ පරිසරයට කොතරම්
هل
බලපෑමක් වේ?
لأفعالنا البسيطة قيمة؟
जब बर्फानी तोदे सब पिघल जाएंगे तो बर्फानी रीछों
Welche
का क्या
Art von
मुस्तकबिल
Auswirkungen
होगा?
hat Palmöl?
Hello, wonderful people, and welcome back to the 4600 kilometers of sustainability podcast. We are here to answer some sustainability related questions that you have sent us on Instagram, as well as to summarize some of our most important sustainability knowledge in order to make you feel more informed, conscious, and environmentally aware, even when life gets busy. My name is Sonja, and I am currently located in Tampere, Finland.
My name is Misha, and my hometown is approximately 4,600 kilometers from Sonja, as I'm from Islamabad, Pakistan. We both are students at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, and we are in our final year of our bachelor's called Global Sustainability Science. It is a program that has an interdisciplinary approach to sustainability, which means that we learn about various environmental issues from different social and natural science viewpoints.
This episode is a sequel for our first episode about climate change. This time we are diving a bit deeper into the processes that are related to it, so buckle up. If you're joining us for the first time now, it might be a good idea to start with the first episode and then come back here, because then this episode will make more sense.
But it is not like we can tell you what to do, so it's totally your choice. We will never know anyway.
Alright, last time we discussed how the greenhouse effect occurs. More greenhouse gases mean that the heat will not be released back to space as easily and the planet warms up. Hence, global warming happens. And this is our problem in a nutshell.
This episode will talk about how this problem is actually more complex than it sounds.
Yeah, the natural world is unfortunately not that simple. If it were, Misha and I would not have much to study about. For example, there is this phenomenon called feedbacks, which makes the whole climate system more complicated and unpredictable.
Firstly, there are positive feedbacks, which mean that when an initial change happens, for example, let's say when temperature rises, the system reacts in a way that will cause the initial change to move even further.
This can sound like a difficult concept to understand, but it's actually not. For example, if temperature rises, that causes the polar ice to melt, as you know. And if you have seen snow, you know that it's really bright and you sometimes have to really squint your eyes when you step out of the door on a sunny day. So obviously, snow and ice reflect a lot of the sunlight right back to space. If the ice melts, there's less of that reflective white surface, and this means more radiation reaches Earth's surface. Hence, the land gets even warmer, and this results in more ice to melt. So this is kind of a vicious cycle, and it causes warming to occur faster than we would otherwise expect. In theory, this could happen in the other direction if we would get more polar ice from somewhere, but yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon, so we do not have to think about that.
Another example considers a thing called permafrost, and permafrost is basically ground that stays frozen all year long.
Just like my heart.
I would disagree, but yes, the permafrost actually stores quite a lot of methane in the polar regions. As you remember from earlier, methane is another greenhouse gas, and it is quite a lot stronger than carbon dioxide. It is the same gas that cows emit a lot. So when the permafrost melts, the methane is released in the atmosphere. By doing so, this causes more warming, which in turn causes more permafrost to melt, which in turn results in more methane in the atmosphere, causing more warming, etc., etc.
There you have your nice, or actually not so nice, positive feedback. Positive feedback accelerates the process, so you end up with a more severe result in a shorter time scale.
Then there are also negative feedbacks that have a stabilizing effect and therefore could slow down the change. An example would be when the planet warms up, more water evaporates to the atmosphere and forms clouds. clouds block some of the incoming sunlight, and this creates a cooling effect. Therefore, the rising temperature triggers a cooling mechanism. This does not work with all kinds of clouds, though, but we do not want to bore you with all that.
Yes, indeed. We have so many other things we want to bore you with. Anyway, it is the positive feedback loops that cause grey hair to climate scientists.
Then, to make matters even more complicated, there are also tipping points. A tipping point is basically a threshold which, when exceeded, can result in large irreversible changes in the state of the system.
An example could be the melting of Arctic summer ice. It is believed by many scientists that it has already passed the tipping point. What happens is when sea ice melts, the Arctic warms because ice no longer covers the ocean. The dark ocean water absorbs more sunlight as it's exposed. This absorption of sunlight by ocean multiplies the warming effect. And after a certain point, even if the temperatures magically become colder, the ice sheet will never grow back to its original thickness, at least in any time scale that would be relevant to us human species.
And this is just one example. The effects of tipping events can entirely change the Earth as we know it. These events lead to the mass extinction of species, dramatic sea level rise, extensive droughts, and the transformation of forests into vast grasslands. These are the disruptions that the humankind cannot afford to suffer with. And the problem with tipping points is also that we do not always see them coming.
We hope that we have managed to illustrate that climate change is much more complicated than just an average temperature rise of 2 to 5 degrees.
It can sometimes be surprising how different ecosystems and natural processes in the world react, and there's probably still so much we don't know about it.
The sad thing about climate change is that it does not treat everyone equally. And usually the ones that suffer the most are not the ones who have been causing it. Sometimes people say that climate change is going to make the weather nicer, and this might be true in some colder regions, at least for a while, but on the other hand, climate change is expected to cause the world's largest refugee crisis when many areas become totally unlivable. So it really is a matter of looking beyond your own circle and caring for others.
This is one reason why issues such as equality, anti-racism, and feminism are important parts of climate change discussion. However, we do not want to make this episode too long, so we are going to talk about that later.
Finally, we wanted to address a question that someone sent us, which goes like this. Why should we care about climate change? Like, how would you convince an average person? And there will hopefully be some other helpful ideas for that coming out in future episodes, but we can also say a few words now.
Obviously, there are plenty of reasons to care about climate, and we will go through them step by step in this podcast. There are things like preventing hunger and natural disasters, as well as extinction wave wiping many precious species from the world. But we will have a whole episode dedicated to, for example, the ecological crisis, and another for climate justice and the impacts of climate change on humans.
But we wanted to address the second part of the question. How do you convince someone that this issue matters and they should care about it? So here are some lessons that we find useful.
First, we would have to think if this person is more likely to be convinced by hard data or something more emotionally impactful like stories and anecdotes. For a lot of people, the latter is probably true, since it is a very natural for us humans. We have been telling stories throughout all human history, so a combination of both is also often very good.
Yes, exactly. But when you tell stories, you will have to make sure that they are not misleading and that they are actually compatible with scientific findings.
We found a very good example of that on YouTube, which is a discussion between doctors and anti-vaxxers in the channel called Jubilee. There's one doctor who gives a very powerful anecdote about a child that had come to his office with a very serious disease that could have been prevented with a vaccine, and now this kid had to have amputations.
You can probably imagine how much more powerful that is for a worried parent who maybe has had their child suffer from side effects than if he would have just shown them a bunch of statistics and fancy graphs. It really shows that you have empathy and you're not just some know-it-all in an ivory tower. Another thing with this example is that the doctor really found a common ground with the parent, which was caring about the well-being of individual children.
We have to understand that these discussions take time and patience. You will probably not make anyone change their mind with one Facebook comment, but rather with several empathic discussions.
It is also important to make sure you're not being aggressive or really blaming them for their life choices. Otherwise, they will just put up their defense and you will not get anywhere. It is well known that climate change is a very difficult topic to handle emotionally, and too much negative feeling about it can cause us to feel paralyzed and just not act on it. Also, a lot of people are in some form of denial about it because that is how the mind is trying to protect itself. And I do not necessarily mean completely in denial about the existence of climate change, but also about how severe the impacts will be.
If the discussion about climate change is hostile, people will be scared of participating in it, and they will rather just not say anything, even if they have valuable inputs. And we really cannot afford to leave people out of the climate movement. This is why we also try to keep our podcast welcoming and more or less lighthearted, even though we both consider the climate crisis a very serious issue. Another reason is that we already have enough doom and gloom in our studies, so we want a more positive approach for ourselves.
Yes, exactly. If you want a very practical tip of how to convince a family member or so, I would suggest that you watch The Life on Our Planet with them. I watched it on Netflix with a close friend that I have been trying to talk to about the importance of reducing animal products for a long time. There is a very powerful scene where Sir David Attenborough explains why the planet cannot support so much animal production, and it is really touching storytelling, both visually and verbally. And that person was really touched, and I could see how it made them think. So it seemed like Sir David Attenborough was a little bit more credible source than me this time.
Gee, I wonder why.
Obviously, there is a time and place for more aggressive measures, like demonstrations that Extinction Rebellion has been doing around the world. The way I see it, they are more for impacting the decision makers and other people who really hold the most power to make a change, and who usually have the information presented to them already, rather than to convince your Aunt Mary to care about this issue and buy less beef. These demonstrations are also a good tool to get people on board to campaign for a systemic change. This episode was a continuation of our first episode, and we have now discussed feedbacks as well as tipping points.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode and will join us next time too. Please stay tuned for future episodes. Also, if you guys have something that you would like us to talk about, or maybe you have an idea for a fun segment for us, please contact us either personally or to our email address 4600podcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Goodbye, guys.
Bye!